Okay, this is Clay with Clay's AC and Auto Repair and Clay Motion here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. If this video is helpful, please like, send me some nice comments. If you want to get messages to me, send them to me through Facebook under Clay's AC and Auto Repair if you've got a question that needs to be answered. I'll try as best I can. Also, subscribe to my page and share my videos. That's really, really important. I do a lot of videos and try to show you guys tips and techniques, not only how to change a part, but how to figure out and diagnose what the problem is, and go from there. So, hey, good afternoon. This is Clay with Clay's AC and Auto Repair and Clay Motion here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. If this video is helpful, please like, send me nice comments. Most of all, share my videos and subscribe to my page. Do a lot of stuff, try to show you guys tips and techniques, not only how to change a part, but figure out if the part is bad, and also the way that you get your hands in places to do it. And I try to think about you working on the ground. I know you're not going to have a lift and all these specialty tools that I have. The first thing that we're going to do is probably check all the fuses like Pat's doing. It's my beautiful someday wife. Been with her 23 years. I love her dearly. Anyways, you can reach out to me on Facebook under Clay's AC and Auto Repair if you got any questions that need to be answered right away. What we got going on is we got a 2002 Ford Escape, and we're going to do an alternator in it more than likely. Pat's using the power probe to check the fuses. I can recommend that you either can pull the fuses because you probably don't have a power probe at home, and you can visually inspect the larger ones. You can take and do a continuity test on the fuses if you're unsure if it's bad. You need to look for a video for that if you want to know how to check a fuse. But we're going to go through and check them. The key important thing is to have your key on inside the car. That's going to energize your fuse through your alternator. If it's bad, you're going to know it's bad. So we're going to check the fuses, then we're going to disconnect the battery, and we're going to show you how to actually change the alternator on the 3.0 version V6 Ford Escape. It's going to be pretty common and pretty similar on just about any year of the Mercury, Mariner, and then the Mazda Tribute. So they're all going to be the same, so that might be listed under my keywords. Even though it's a Ford Escape, it's going to be the same. So we'll start doing this, and then we'll go to the next step, which is to pull the alternator out. Okay, so first thing we did was remove the 19 millimeter lug nuts off the wheel. In your case, you're going to have this jacked up. It's going to help you get to the bolts. I haven't decided. I don't remember the last time I changed one of these. I know I have, but I don't remember if it comes out through the bottom or if you got to take it out through the top. But you're going to take your wheel off. You're going to take your plastic cover off so you can gain access to the tensioner right here. And you might be able to do this through the top, but you're going to use a 1/2-inch drive ratchet to put it right inside that square block right there. And then you're going to swing it back this way to be able to loosen up your belt and take your belt off. Okay, so now we're going to start removing the 313 millimeter bolts. If you have your new alternator, you can look at it and you'll see that there's 2 on the bottom and 1 on the top. There could possibly be a bracket in the back that holds it on there, and hopefully you've disconnected your battery if it's got a charge. The bolt that holds the copper one on there that I'm pointing to, that's a 10 millimeter nut that holds that on there, and you're more than likely going to come in blind from the top of the vehicle, reach your arm around the back, and you're going to use a ratchet to loosen that up, or maybe a wrench, and you're not going to be able to see it, but it'll have a rubber boot on it and you can pull it off. I'm not going to pull the clip. I'm not going to worry about pulling the clip, the energized clip for the alternator, till I actually get the alternator loose, because they can kind of be a pain in the butt. If you can feel around and feel the clip back there, you can pull that off right now too if you want, before you take these bolts out. Now I'm using a flaxhead 13 millimeter gear wrench style to get my bolts out. Now you're gonna probably either need a flaxhead ratchet to get these bolts out. It's gonna be the easiest way, but if you can see up in there, I just basically put that in there and came through the front and loosened them up. These 2 bottom ones. Now the top one's pretty simple to get to. I don't know if I can show you a real good picture of that, but we can get to that with a wrench, with a regular wrench or ratchet, and get that out from underneath here. And then we're going to figure out how to get the alternator out of the hole once we get all that stuff loose. I'll probably wait and take my my energizing off, or my battery positive off until I get the alternator loose. I think it's going to be simpler for me in this situation. But anyway, something interesting that I just noticed. I took my universal, which is mine's called a wobbler, but you're going to use a universal. Took a couple of extensions, and you can go up from right up through here and get onto the lower alternator bracket bolts and turn them out. If you got an air ratchet, that's going to be great, but even if you have to ratchet them, you can ratchet them from underneath the car here, and it'll be much simpler than trying to get them loose underneath there, or if you don't have one of them flex head like I had. So now I've got the alternator loose and I've flipped it around, so now it's easier to get to my nut there on the back of there, and it'll be easier to get my clip out so I can unplug the alternator. So now that I've got the main wire off, my battery charge wire, you're supposed to be able to push this clip right there and then pull back. Now I recommend, if you can get your fingers on it like this to squeeze it, push it up and then pull it back. That allows the clip to bounce back, and then you can pull it right down. If you're looking at mine and you wonder why mine looks all coppery and yours doesn't look like that, that's because I had some corrosion on mine and I replaced the end of it. I bought that at Home Depot over in the electrical section. A really good connector. I actually really like it a lot, and I was still able to use the rubber boot to cover it. So we're going to put some tape on that after we replace this alternator. But now we're going to go and unplug this, and then we're going to figure out how we get it out of here. Okay, after all my observation, and I watched a video on a guy actually removing this alternator through the top, I've realized that it's going to be simpler to just remove the alternator by removing the axle. This 32 millimeter nut right here. Now that might not be stuff that you have at home, but here's the problem with doing it the other way. The way that the other gentleman describes is you might end up breaking a lot of stuff. When you're working on stuff at home, it's very difficult. And about the only thing that I think that you might not have at home is a 32 millimeter socket. And obviously that's what we got AutoZone and Advance for. We can go down and rent one of them. They don't charge anything for it. You can use your breaker bar to take it off. And if you can't hold the wheel while you turn it, have somebody apply the brake for you. So then you'll be able to take off this nut. And I'm going to show you some techniques on how to get this axle out. It'll make it easier. You will be able to do it at home with just a few small hand tools other than the 32 millimeter that you're going to need. So we're going to go ahead and remove the axle. We don't have to take off the brakes, none of that stuff. We're just going to remove that axle nut. We're going to remove the two bolts up here. And just for flexibility, we're going to remove the outer tie rod end. I'm going to show you how to remove this tie rod end without actually ruining it, and very simply remove it. So we'll go. So here's a good tip for you. You need to take the cotter pin out. So you want to bend this cotter pin the way it's supposed to be, and then you want to take pliers, and you're going to angle the pliers like this so you get some leverage, and then you're going to pull that out of there like that. Okay. All right, so once you took your cotter pin out of there, you're going to hit here. You're not going to hit this. You're going to hit right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to hit this hard enough to create heat, which is going to force that out. So in your situation, you're probably going to be on the ground, so you're going to have somebody pull up, but it's not necessary that you really pull up on this. It's going to pop right out. And that's how easy you get them out without breaking them. So now I don't have any damage to my tie rod end. It's off. Now we're going to remove the two bolts there. This was a 17 millimeter castle nut, just so you know. Okay, this side is an 18 millimeter and this side's a 17 millimeter. So you're going to take a wrench, you can wedge it up against your brake rotor right here, and then we're just going to knock these two bolts out, and then that'll give us the flexibility to be able to remove our axle, I believe. Okay, so when you're tapping this axle out, be very careful. You don't want to peen over these threads. So you just give it a couple taps. I tapped mine with the ball peen hammer. Now it's fallen away. I removed the 10 millimeter screw that held the ABS line on. I'm trying to take off as little as possible. I'm probably going to push this clip out of here that holds the brake line in there, just so I have more flexibility. Then I'll be able to pull this out, get my axle out, and pull my axle out this way. And I might have to remove this bracket. I'm looking at it, but we're going to see here in a couple moments. Okay, if you want to remove that brake line, you're just going to take a screwdriver and put it in there, and then you'll be able to pull this tab out right here. I'm going to use a little pry bar that I got, and I should be able to pull it out. Probably need 2 hands, but that's how you do that. Okay, so now I was able to remove that. I did end up removing the brake line. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a pry bar and we're going to pop this out of here. Now this takes a sharp pop to get this out of here, but we're going to remove this portion of that axle, and then we'll see if we can get the alternator out without removing the intermediate shaft. But even if we have to remove the intermediate shaft, that's not a big deal. The bolts are right here. Okay, so had a little bit of trouble getting my axle to come unseated from the clip. There's a little clip inside there that holds the axle in, and it seats around this right here. So what I did was I took a pry bar and I went from the back up underneath here, and I took a hammer, and I had an assistant, beautiful Patricia Root, she doesn't want to be on camera, so had an assistant just hold onto the axle so it had a little bit of tension on it, so when I popped it, it would come out. So that came out. Now I'm going to take out these two 13mm nuts that are at the top of this housing right here and get this cover out. Now I don't know about yours, but once I removed the 2 nuts, my intermediate shaft came right out, but it doesn't have a clip at the end of it, so it must be just them 2 nuts hold it up in there. But that came right out, and let's see if we can get the alternator out. Okay, I realized there was one more step to it. It's actually relatively very simple. You're going to remove 3 10mm bolts out of this bracket. I'm going to show you this bracket when I take it off, and then your alternator will come right out. Just keep in mind that the reason that I'm doing it this way is because I've worked on cars for a very long time, and when you start unplugging and undoing what the other people show you how to do it, you have a lot greater likelihood that you're going to break something. If you do it the way that I'm showing you how to do it, it is pretty straightforward. It is pretty simple. You should relatively be able to conquer this fairly quickly. I'd say in your driveway, if you're somewhat a novice / amateur mechanic, you'll probably have 4 or 5 hours into doing it. But on the other hand, you're not going to have as much breakage, and you're able to determine that if you need ball joints like I do on my Escape here, it will. But I'm going to show you that bracket here in a second. Okay, so here's the bracket. There's 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, and 1 bolt there. And then if you remember, I'm not going to tip it up because I got my bolts in it, and then obviously your alternator bolts to it. Very simple to get out. This was the last component that needed to come out, and then we'll pull the alternator out. Okay, so now I've got a jack underneath the engine. We need to make enough room to get this alternator out. I should have tried this before I removed that bracket, so if you watch the whole video, then maybe you can try this before you remove the alternator bracket itself that holds it in there. You got one 17mm ratchet or socket here, and we're going to take out this bolt right here, which will allow the engine to cradle up, and then that should give us enough room to get it out. Okay, when you go to remove your alternator, you're going to make sure the back is facing you, and then pull it out this way. Same thing for the installation. It'll make it much easier to get in. Then once you get it up in there, you have plenty of room to spin it around. When you're going to reinstall the belt, it's best to route it around your alternator and everything, and then put it on your AC compressor last. Generally, most belts, just as a little tip, it's best to slide them onto the flat pulleys without the ribbed first, but because of the routing of this belt, how this goes up to the power steering pump and comes back around, you can't really do that because you need to be able to slide it on there. So the simplest way to get it on is going to be putting it on your AC compressor last. Now at this point, I've got the the alternator back in its stock location. I've got my belt put on. I'm going to go ahead and try to fire up the vehicle, and I'm going to take a voltage reading and make sure that my alternator is actually charging. And the reason I'm doing this is just to make sure I didn't miss anything. because the rest of it's pretty straightforward and simple, and we're going to go ahead and reinstall the axle and put the bolts back in, etc. Okay, so I don't know how much of this video bled over, and I've talked about this for a while before I actually did it. I separated the two halves of my axle. That wasn't necessary. The only thing you need to do is take out the two nuts up there in the top. Let's see if I can get you. So this one and that one, there's two 13mm nuts, and then the whole assembly will slide out. Make it simpler than trying to separate the two halves. But if you watch the whole video before you did the job, you'll catch this little tip here that you don't need to remove both pieces, because you're gonna have to remove both pieces anyways. You don't need to remove them, separate them. You just need to remove them as one unit. It'll be super simple. Okay, so we got the alternator out. Lifting up the engine was the trick. You can kind of see how that's elevated. I pretty much lifted it up to the maximum that I could with the motor mount off of there, and then we were able to pull it out. So we're going to take this down and have it rebuilt or repaired or get a new one. What they're talking about is they talk about removing the ECM and removing all of this stuff over here. My experience has been when you start unplugging all of this stuff, you start breaking stuff. And I don't have anything, believe it or not, this is an old truck, but I don't have anything broken on it, and there's no lights on it. So I like to keep my stuff that way. It might be old and dirty, but it's still a good truck. So can you do that in your driveway? Yes. Do I think this way is actually easier? I do. If I had remembered how I had done it before, I think this would have been much simpler for me. Still took me a good 2 hours to get it out of there. But it wasn't that bad. If I'd have done it before, I think I could have done it in probably 45 minutes or so, had it out and maybe back in within 2 hours. If the video is helpful, please like, send me nice comments. Most of all, share my videos, subscribe to my page. And remember, if anybody else can do it, you can do it too. Don't be the next to them, be the first to you. Have a great day. God bless. Thank you.